Françoise Schein is an important contemporary artist working with azulejos on a global scale. She has devoted a significant part of her work to the promotion of human rights by means of large-scale artistic creations in which azulejos play a crucial role. Since 1997, her projects have been developed in collaboration with the Inscrire Association, an NGO founded by the artist and committed to promoting different issues related to citizenship and human rights through participatory artworks. We met Françoise Schein at the international conference GlazeArt and asked her to talk to us about her artistic career, her future projects, and the paper she presented at the conference. Thank you for accepting our invitation to talk about your work, which has been so important for the contemporary affirmation of artistic styles. Your first works traced mental maps of different locations, along with the various layers of information that define cities and their inhabitants. My question is, how did you come to use styles in your artistic practice?
That's a big question. Okay. How did I come to work with tiles? It was actually a nice encounter in France because I wanted to do something in the subway. My first attraction was to talk about cities in the underground of cities because I wanted to do something about the human rights. And I thought human rights was a subject that, in fact, holds the entire society. And the only location to actually really put it in an interesting way was to put it under our feet. So I went to see some metros in Paris, and I finally ended up constructing the Concorde station. And then came up the idea of the material. It was about the city and the human rights. It was, in fact, a double thematic. And text. How do you actually write a text to make it visible, readable, but not really, with problematics, artistic problematics, to make it a little bit hard to read. So my solution was to put one letter on one tile and take off the space between the words. But the tiles that were given to me were a kind of tile that was not square. That was not an azulejos. It was a rectangle tile. So I had to make a new tile. I had to make and design this new tile so as to be able to have a square and to put the letter in the very middle. So that was my very, very, very first approach to tile making, to tile or working with tiles. So the Concorde station was finally built, and it's about the human rights without space between the words. The second project that, no, in fact, the third project that I did was in Portugal. I was invited by the Metropolitan de Lisboa to create a station about human rights. And then I realized that Portugal was an incredible country, which I immediately loved because it talked about democracy, new democracy at that time. And it also had a fabulous history about the traveling around the world and the discoveries, the great discoveries. And so we discussed this with José Manuel Consigliero Pedroso, who was at the time the president of the Metro. And he was a very open mind. He's still alive today. He's 98. And I talked to him yesterday. It was like emotional almost. And we decided that the project would be double thematic again, really about the discoveries and about the human rights. So this was then, of course, now I was in the nation of tiles, of azulejos. And the whole, it was, they introduced me to a factory. Everything seemed so easy. It was not so hard as in France, was more complex because they don't use tiles that much besides bathrooms and kitchens. Here it was like all over the place, facade, buildings, churches, huge panels. So everything was open. So I could invent this incredible park station which has 450,000 azulejos. Half of the station is the human rights put on the vault. And the rest is different panels, 50 panels, 4 by 3 meters, if I remember well exactly, about the 4 or 5 centuries of discoveries and of traveling. So that was my approach here. I mean, my discovery of what Portugal was about. I think Portugal is about tiles, azulejos. I think I can say that, at least for me, and I think for most Portuguese.
Just for curiosity, which factory did you work with at the Concorde station?
In Paris, I worked with the Fabrica, the factory Carré, les céramiques Carré, which I don't think exist anymore. They were bought by some others, like it often happens. So I went to visit the factory, and my whole point was to transform the very traditional 15 by 7.5 tile, which was tilted also to the side. I don't know how to say this in English, and to make it a square tile. So we had to design a tile. It was not flat like the azulejos. It was, biseauté in French. And so I worked with that factory, went to the factory, worked with the technicians to actually make that tile. It was also made in grès, sandstone, because it's the northern part of Europe. It goes under 0 at times. Here we you rarely work with sandstone. It's more faience, ceramics, basically. So that's how it was done. Then I created also the text. The text was the alphabet, basically, create an alphabet. So I decided to work with Garamond, because Garamond is a beautiful letter. It's historical for France as well. The curves and counter curves and the way it's designed, every single letter is a piece of art. And I choose 8 centimeters of Garamond tile with a tip of 8 centimeters to place it in the middle of the tile. And that was a major decision, because afterward I would still use that Garamond in most of my stations to refer to actually the French installation and creation, which is about the French Revolution. Since the subject is about democracy and human rights, it made total sense to keep the design, sort of perpetuate the design in the other stations.
What is your work method? How do you handle the whole process?
Okay, basically, I was trained and formed as an architect and an urban designer. So that helps to conceptualize whatever the size of a work is, whether it's huge or small. I can draw and make the plans for the entire project. So for Parc Station, I had the plan of the station, the length, the height, the radius, everything. And that was on one part of it. The other part of it was reading the text and the maps and everything about the history of the great discoveries. So I actually then decided that on the size of the station, I could divide it into 50 sections, 50 large square. It's a relationship between how many thematics do I have to talk about it and what is the size. So I had to reduce it to 50 drawings, 50 maps, and the entire station is divided like that in sections. So it's a relationship between thematics and a space, basically, which is sort of strange, because I oblige myself to divide the history of Portugal into 50 major moments. So I had to either combine 2 in 1, or 3 in 1, or take one apart if I decided it wasn't really important enough, whatever. But mostly it was a combination. So that was to create the entire structure. If you see the very plan of the station, which I do have, it's really a design of a sort of a huge cathedral with 450,000 tiles, well organized, section by sections. Then it was about what do you put where. I've decided to work in a zigzag, historical and chronological zigzag inside the station. So there is first the story of democracy to the Greek time. Then we go across the other side of the platform to talk about a Middle Age. And then you advance like that historically from one platform to the next one, all the way to China and Japan. These are the two last maps about the history. And sometimes you have, when it's important, you have the human rights who fall, they are on the wall and they fall into the map. So they become actually the oceans of some of the maps. It was like made in sort of a particular way, in a way, making the text of a philosophical text entering historical maps, which of course makes no sense because chronologically that doesn't make sense, but it's a statement also that like when you enter when the human rights enter into some countries where obviously it was the invention of slavery, I want the viewer then to actually see that it doesn't connect, because it was not the greatest idea that it was created in the world. So it's a critical idea basically. So that's how it was all created. And then each map, and if we enter into the methodology of how to create these maps, I follow the walk of the viewer. The viewer walks on the platform, and as always, to have the continent that the Portuguese traveled around on always it's the viewer and that decides where the north is. So the north is not always at the same place. Sometimes it's left, sometimes it's right, sometimes it depends how it is divided, the map, and how I take that map and put it on the platform. So that was how to design the geography. Then I had to tell the stories, the big story about what did they discover at each moment of the discovery around, for instance, around Africa, the slave coast, and then along the coast, and then finally South Africa. So all these are histories, telling history. So to tell that, I had to make little hieroglyphic drawings. Now we come to the idea that how to tell a story with images. So with my assistant, I had lots of assistants at that time who were young, as I explained yesterday at the seminar here, the university. It was, some of my assistants were reading books because there was a lot to read. I mean, the history of Portugal is huge. I had a pile of books like that and maps. And, so we reduced all these to like 300 drawings. Some we made ourselves, some we took from Encyclopédie Diderot, some we took from ancient book, or Portuguese book of history, and we established basically an alphabet to be able to explain that this idea with one seta, that's Portuguese, with an arrow, leads to another one, then leads to another thing, then they go back, then they don't succeed in going there, so they have to change their mind. All this was explained with drawings. And then at the very entrance of the station, in the staircases, there is the entire alphabet explained with the definition of each of the drawing, what is what. Then we come to the factory, basically. That was what I just explained, was more of the concept from the general idea, when to enter a huge space, including the corridors and the escalators. Then we come to making the different languages, which is different alphabets. And then comes the actual making. So making, then we go back to Viva la Mego. Big factory, extremely well organized to work with artists, with artisans that know their work very, very well. With Ana Paula, who is the chemist there, who would make my color. I had made a scheme of about, I think we had about 10 or 12 or 13 colors. I don't have the exact number. But I came with all my drawings. I had made pastel drawings, which actually today are at the Museum of the Azulejos. I gave them all my drawings. And so she made the colors. First thing, she made the colors for each tile. And then I had to choose between liso or spongiado, and which is basically sponged or totally smooth. And I took the more artisan art crafts-like, which I found it more interesting as a base. And then we had to create all the maps. So the different artisans would cut out with a pochoir. Well, they created the maps of like South Africa, to take an example. And then all the little drawings, we made a huge list of how these hieroglyphics drawings would be printed on each tiles and where would they go, because sometimes they were on the background of blue, sometimes on white, sometimes on green, etc. So we had to make where they would be located. But since, I mean, as an architect, I can make a plan. Every tile has a number. We know exactly where it goes, and we just make piles and piles and piles of the different locations. And that's okay. It's just it's a huge puzzle. 450,000 tiles in a puzzle and numbered. You know, so that's how it was made. And Viva la Mego has huge workshop. So basically, I remember it was sort of a cobalt blue based tiles. The entire factory was blue. It was blue everywhere, in the kiln, in the workshops, in the retoque, the retouche, everywhere it was like this blue. You know, it was fabulous. And I basically lived in this factory. I was there from 9 in the morning till 10 at night. After everybody was gone, I had the permission to stay a little longer and to paint and paint and paint. And I had several of my own assistants who would help me making the lines to connect ideas one to the other, while the artisans were making the base maps and what I call actually the gris-gris. The hieroglyph alphabet I call the gris-gris. That's the little nickname for it.
You have devoted an important part of your work to the promotion of human rights through large-scale artistic works. You also have founded the Inscrire Association, an NGO dedicated to the promotion of issues related to citizenship and human rights through participatory works of art. How has this link between ethics and art, which led to the creation of Inscrire, come about?
Well, the thing that it's actually very early when I decided to be an architect. When you study architecture, you have to invent projects, at least at that time when I did study. You had to invent what kind of project you want to do. And immediately I wanted to do social housing and create projects which were socially engaged, I would say. I would not imagine, large banks or large, I don't know what, projects which I was not interested in. So I was already, when I was 18 or 20 years old, I wanted to do that. Then when I studied also urban design at Columbia, also there I worked into the Bronx, in New York City. I analyzed what the Bronx was about at that time in the 80s. And so I was already, and my mother worked at the Red Cross. Maybe that explains this. Then I thought that installing the human rights in Paris, when in the country that had the French Revolution, that had to create the first text of the Declaration of the Human Rights and the Citizen, was very important to do. So that we were then in the 1987, I would say, just 2 years before the 89 celebration of the Human Rights Declaration and the French Revolution. So I just imagined a project. I thought it was very interesting to just imagine it and propose it to the subway. So it took me 2 years to actually knock at the door of the president of the RATP subway. It took me a long time to get there, but I did it. He was a very intelligent man, and he said yes in about 5 minutes. And the project was decided. It was immediate. Then I thought, when I finished the whole project, well, actually, it's not only Paris, it's not only France. this has influenced the entire world. I mean, the notion of democracy is bigger than me, is bigger than him, is bigger than Paris. It's major. It's a philosophical ideal for society. So maybe it would be very interesting to create a whole network of projects in subways in the different capitals of the cities in the world. So maybe, you know, the UN should have done it. But since they didn't do it, I thought I would start it. And so I did 8 stations dedicated to the human rights in the world, finally. And Lisbon is the 3rd one. It was Brussels after that. Then it was Lisbon. Then it was Stockholm. Then it was Berlin. And finally 3 in Brazil. In Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Brasilia is the last one. Now I'm trying to make one in Vienna. But who knows? It's always like a huge deal to create these, because basically when I say I knock at the door, I do go and knock at the door. I make it a proposal. I say, hey, you know, you're a major city, Vienna, let's say, maybe you should do this. You know, it's with the world the way it is today, maybe we should do a subway with actually the help of children, because I do work on the human rights with children. In the meantime, after Park, you know, I've decided that my assistants were young people. They were very smart, very talented. Maybe that kind of work, or that kind of youth, that I can inject that into the project, because it's their future more than mine. But this is the other part of my work. After the Park station and the Stockholm station, I decided I really wanted to, it's an economical research, that when I'm given, let's say, 2 millions, not me, I don't receive the million, but when it costs 2 millions to create a huge subway station, maybe that money could go through the educational system and for no additional cost. Since we go into these schools, and we did it in Sao Paulo, we go into the schools with the tiles, we do teach what the human rights are all about, and then the students, the young kids who are 13 years old from anywhere, they make the drawing, and then we take these tiles, painted tiles, and we make them part of the project inside the subway. The one subway station that I've done like that is in Sao Paulo. It's Station Luz, which means light in Portuguese. And so, so that was very important. And so this whole transformation of my work, which is about making large projects, structural projects in cities, with, on the other side, a whole work about education, about human rights, to people who basically really deserve that kind of pleasure to work into that field. They don't never have any occasion to be part of the building of their city. They live in suburbs, they're poor, they have, you know, no chance to ever participate to a project, and suddenly they do. Suddenly you go to that school and you tell that kid, your work is going to be there forever, you know, and that changes everything. And so every time we do this, whether the final project is in a subway or in a panel in the city, it creates a great synergy between these kids. And they're so excited because it's going to be seen in 40 years from now. They can come with their children, their own children, and say, hey, your daddy did that when he was 14 years old. You know, that's, you can't, there's nothing like that. And then the fact of the azulejos, I'm coming back to the material again, it's 14 by 14, you know, it's like the size of a telephone, more or less. A little bigger, a little heavier, but it's forever. That telephone that we all have, you make a click, you like an image, click, and then you pass to the next one, and then at the end of the day, you don't even remember what you've seen and what you've liked. You know, and this, the azulej that you've made, painting it slowly into a few hours in school, stay there for the next 100 years. That's a huge click. That's a permanent click. A click that stays. It's like a statement that one children has done in his life for society. Multiply this by hundreds of thousands of them. You know, that's how it works, basically. This is why I believe that the azulejos is major, actually, as a new type of, I say new, but it's ancient. It's a new type of language that can stay in cities and be visible and be used just like our telephones, but in a much better and permanent way.
It's an inspiring way to have a look at the azulejos.
That's a tile. Basically, that's the wrong one tile. On the other side, it's you paint and it stays, you know.
How do you work with all these kids and young people? Or how do you do this kind of participatory work?
It all started in Portugal for a change. I met with Margarida Cardoso, who was the director of the Centre Jacques Delors in Centre Culturel de Belém. And she was directing this representation of Europe, actually, in Portugal. And then she asked me one day, don't you have an idea of what we can do to celebrate the European Day in May? It's in May. And so I figured, yeah, I just come back from Brazil, and we did a huge work there in many different favelas, and we worked with the people. And so we can actually, now I know how to work with tiles and with the people. Basically, how does it work? And we did it in Portugal, but we had done it before that. We had that in Rio de Janeiro. And so methodologically, how does it work? We just come with packs of boxes of azulejos, and we go into a class of 60 of these kids. Of course, we have organized that with the school and with the teachers. We've explained to them, obviously, what we're going to do. And then these kids, the moment we come, not with a piece of paper and not with pencils, but we come with tiles. Wow, what is this, madam? What is this? What are we going to do? And we give 4 or 6 of these tiles to each of them. Then we read, we've printed little books about the human rights, and we do sort of a, how do you say this? Anyway, every kid, or group of 2 kids, or binôme, as we say in French, they have to read an article and invent an image about that article. So the methodology is to tell them what kind of story that you've seen in your life, or you've seen on TV, or you've read in some books, is related to that article, basically in your own life. It's projecting the reality into this text, which was made in 1948, and it's a little bit afterward. Anyway, it's a major text, and so they have to invent a story, and then once they finish writing it, they actually put this into an images, and then we help them to invent whatever image it is. If they need a car, a person, a face, whatever, they draw, and then they finally pass this drawing on, which is on paper, on the ceramics, and then it goes to the painting of the ceramics, with the right pencils and the right painting. I mean, we have obviously we have all the right products, and we paint not on cru, but it's azulejos, which is already cooked once. So that's a very important matter. I realized this actually because I didn't know that everybody paints on uncooked ceramics in Portugal. I don't. I paint on tiles that are already cooked because you can already retouch them. If you don't like your drawing, you pass it into the water and it's gone away in a matter of seconds, and you start it again. That makes it possible because you explain to that kid that doesn't paint very well, you say, it doesn't matter. Take that little stick, and then you scrape like this, and then you have this beautiful straight line. And they understand this immediately. They feel totally at ease, and they paint and they organize the drawing. And then finally, we put this into sort of a bubble around to sort of frame each of these drawings, and we install them within a bigger scheme that I've already drawn in other plans. I don't show them the entire scheme because it's too much for these kids. So, and then by the end of the day, we bring these big gazettes in wood. We bring this to the studio. We fix everything. We put their name, the number of the article. We put it into the kiln. We burn it. Then we install it into the subway station or the panel or whatever it is. it's actually simple in a way.
An important part of your tile coverings were destined for countries without a strong tile tradition. Well, except for Brazil.
Not at all. You think so? It used to be. In Rio de Janeiro, tiles, azulejos, they forgot even how to paint on it. When I was there in 2000, I discovered, I went first to Brazil in the year quasi 2000, in 2000. There were very little azulejos. They're not interested anymore. So actually, I went to knock at the door again at the door of Eliane factory, and they really liked the idea of doing this, but they didn't know anymore how to do it. So they actually paid for my plane ticket to go to their factory in the very south of Brazil and to recuperate the technical for azulejos, for small azulejos, and to how to paint on it. I did that with them. I have photograph of this. It's incredible because they had totally forgotten. You know, most of the factories who are tile making these days, they don't make tiles. They make these huge pieces of, 50 by 50 centimeters of fake wood, fake this and fake that, and put this on the floor in the bathroom and everything. But tiles, only in Portugal it still happened, and only a few factories in the world it exists. It's sort of disappearing. So I think it's very important to, in fact, emphasize what you do in Portugal and the fact of tile and painting on tile, not only about human rights, but anything as an easy material to use to create facades and projects, visuals, images, which you do. I know Portuguese artists still do, but not in other countries. Not in other countries. In Vienna, I did a project in Vienna. It was they rediscovered again, that kind of artisanal craftsmanship. I also worked in Ramallah in Palestine. And there we had to import Turkish tiles, which of course Turkey has a huge tradition for that. So it was easy, it was next door, let's say. In France, there is a tradition, but they don't paint much on it anymore. It's a tradition that could disappear if we don't work on it. Let's put it that way. I think it's very important to emphasize the quality and the possibility that is open through the material, which is, that size.
Can you tell us about your experience with GlazeArt? You presented a paper entitled Azulejos, Urbanity, Education and Democracy. But why this conference, and what was the reaction to your communication?
Well, the thing is that it was a call for papers. I found it on the web. It just suddenly appeared on my computer. Call for papers was a beautiful image, an image of a painted tile. I figured, whoa, call for paper for painted tile. Then I investigated, I went a little further down, and then I realized it was all kinds of possible subjects, including artistic and design and things like that. Of course, there was technical and chemistry and whatever else. So I had no idea who would be my colleague talking. So I figured, but it's artistic, so why not? I made a proposal to explain basically what I am explaining here, and I was taken. So I figured everything's great, fantastic. So I'm going immediately to Lisbon, talking Portuguese, talking English, which is in English, and explain the project. Then I realized that I met the whole, the papers, the different presentation. And my surprise is that it's 90% technical about chemistry. The green is copper, and tin is making the white, etc., etc. And historically, the analysis of archaeology and old tiles, from the 9th century in Iraq or Mesopotamia until Europe in all the different centuries, 7, 8, 9, etc., not until today. It's a lot about historical and technically and chemically. And it's a lot of people talking about that with the same kind of machineries and engineers, basically. I have nothing about engineers because I think I do need them. When I make a subway station, I work with engineers. But I was surprised that there are more artists. I think I'm the only one. So that's a question. How come more artists didn't respond and weren't taken? I asked some of the organizing, and they told me that some other years they were more artistic or design-oriented presentation. Well, does it talk to us about the emphasis of the notion of technology? That telephone, is it winning? Again, azulejos. The technicity is winning against art, because art is something else. Art is, it's psychology, it's imagination, it's not numbers, it's about, it's about life, really. That's what art is about. And here we're talking about numbers. So I don't know what kind of society we're going towards. I'm sort of trying to explain that we are human, and we remain human. I know artificial intelligence is coming to be smarter than us. Still, do we want to suicide and let the earth to robots? I am not convinced it's the best idea. So I think artists or intellectuals or philosophers, we're there for exactly saying this, so I'm saying it the way I can.
Finally, what are your projects for the near future?
How near is the future? For tomorrow. Well, I'm going to teach perspective drawings next week. That's the very near future, by hand, not by machine. I'm teaching my art students in Normandy. I'm a teacher in Normandy Art School, Beaux-Arts School. And I have other projects. I'm working in Molenbeek in Belgium, which is a sort of a tough neighborhood where a lot of immigrants and refugees arrive from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Africa. And I'm working within this fabulous secondary school, making projects with them about how hard was their life to fly away from Syria, Idlib and Homs, all these places that were totally destructed, and how they arrived in Belgium and why and what kind of trip, and people in their family died and things like that. So we made 2 years ago a huge panel about this. We call it the Histories of Lives with S's. And then the next year we work with this in the same school about what kind of future they see for themselves, what kind of job would they like to have. Because most of these young people who are refugees and immigrants, it's very attractive for these young boys to sell drugs or become jihadists or I don't know what, And so talking about another kind of future that they can have. They can become lawyers. They can study as engineers. They can become artists. They can work in a big factory if they want to. There are many, many possibilities if they study at school. So there is a way for them to enter society in a proper way and make a real life for themselves. So this is very important. So I do this with, of course, other artists. BD, comic books assistant that I have, they help me doing this with them, which is very, very interesting. And then this year we work with, this is the last project, it's a 3 years project. We work about their idea of what a city should be, what kind of city they want, with flowers, with buildings, with I don't know what. I mean, they imagine their own city. So that's one of the projects. It's for a museum which is called Canal Pompidou. It's the Centre Pompidou, which is a major museum in Paris. Now it's opening an extension, a new museum in Brussels. Then I'm also working in a psychiatric hospital for the past 2 years. I'm working with the patients. It's actually it's a tough place because they've really done wrong things, and working with them is very interesting as well. To sort of create a new energy so that they can be reinserted in society. See how they can, with art, with making projects on ceramics. It's all on ceramics. It's all on azulejos. How they can express themselves and visualize a better future for themselves, which is very interesting. And so that's then I'm new project, but it's another technique. I'm working with fabric also for the moment.
Many projects.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Obrigada. Obrigada a você. Somos todas iguais, artigo 1. He's from Brazil, 16 years old kid.